It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to this Agronomic Monday edition of RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and yes, I will be in the driver's seat today and tomorrow for Tuesdays with Lyndsey, coming up, of course. So thank you for joining me today. Super excited about today's lineup. I've got Jeremy Boychyn of the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions joining me to talk about some top-of-mind agronomic topics happening in Alberta and even, yes, just a titch into Saskatchewan as well. We've got plenty of producers in Ontario asking about the soybean replant decision. We had plenty of beans stranded. Now, it did rain today, but as she explains and goes over, will this rain be enough to reverse some of those replant decisions? Or does it really just spell the death knell for what's out there? Super important discussion, of course, happening there. And then, as always, it is Monday, and so we have our resident agronomist, Peter Johnson, joining us for the last two segments of today's show. Definitely some key things that we're going to discuss. I'm definitely going to ask him about hay. So here in Ontario, our May was very dry, and we also had incredibly hot weather. That meant that some hay was taken pretty early, and we've had reports of heating and even spontaneous combustion of some dry hay. I'm using air quotes. You can't see them. So yeah, some important things there. Also some rotation discussions I want to ask him about. So definitely some cool stuff going on there. All right. It is Agronomic Monday. Would love to get your feedback, your questions, all of those sorts of things. You can call that RealAg feedback line, 1-855-776-6147. You can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. And of course, follow us across social media. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, at Real Agriculture. You'll find us. We've got lots of great stuff on there. And you can always head over to realagriculture.com. Okay, without further ado, let's get on with the show. Jeremy Boychyn is going to join me right after this.
It's now time for a product spotlight with U.S. Borax. We're talking to Roger Gunning. So when we're talking about refined borate fertilizers, why does it matter where the borates come from?
It actually comes from Boron, California, which is a small town. It's one of the richest borate deposits on the planet. It's about the purity of the product, but for a few reasons, I think our North America farmers, we're closer. The convenience of our distributors and warehouse locations with no import restrictions. And this helps allow us to provide a better service than other borate fertilizer suppliers. Our customers, they can be confident that we're providing them with a refined borate product free from impurities that may pose a problem, for their crops.
Well, as we've been saying here on RealAg Radio for the past couple months, Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name and go to borax.com.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio on this Agronomic Monday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and we've got the best from the West joining us on the line. It's Jeremy Boychyn. He's the Agronomy Research and Extension Manager with Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, Lyndsey. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's Monday. We got some rain. I don't want to throw it in your face, but I'm just saying we did. And we needed it. Don't we always? Anyway, so we're in really good spirits here in Ontario today. However, let's start in Alberta where it has been hot. It has been dry. How dire are things in certain areas?
Lyndsey, watching the weather and watching almost every other part of wheat-producing areas of Canada get hit with rain, except Alberta, has been heartbreaking. And yes, we are, oh my goodness, we've been seeing 30-degree days, and there's parts of Alberta that, we've seen maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 millimeters of rain since the end of April. There's areas that are dire. They're heading out in parts of southern Alberta. We're in dire stress right now, and we need moisture, and moisture would help right now. We are at the end of that tillering stage, and we're getting into elongation. So the stress on tillering has already impacted that crop, unfortunately. So we probably had maybe a loss of some of those additional tillers, which are going to contribute to yield. But if we do get moisture, hopefully it's really going to help fill those heads. Wheat is elastic. It'll adjust with the conditions that it has. In these stressful conditions, it's slowing its above ground growth, but it's also producing more roots because it knows it needs more moisture. So it's putting that energy down. So hopefully when we do get rain, we'll be able to fill those kernels well. The challenge will be, are we going to see late tillers? Are we going to see a lot of the weeds popping up that haven't been popping up in the spring because we've been so dry? So if we do get that later rains in July, it may pose a few challenges for producers in terms of decision-making around harvest, and managing those weeds later in the season, or even what that may mean for managing weeds prior to the 2024 season crop. So yes, we're challenged right now, Lyndsey, and we're keeping our fingers crossed for rain because we need it.
Mm-hmm. Now, certainly, so for anyone who's seen our wheat school, Jeremy, you've been working with our own Carrie Osterhaus and covering some of these topics. Definitely there are some areas that are doing okay, but in general, yes, there are some areas that are really hurting for moisture, which is really frustrating. And of course, to add insult to injury, we've also got grasshopper feeding. We've got cutworms. So where are we at with the pests side of the equation?
Yeah, if you've been following prairiepest.ca, it seems like every single pest is ahead of schedule, and that's because we've seen such warm conditions early on in the season. So our grasshoppers, I was reading on their website, and we're at 68% hatch, which typically at this time of the year we'd be in around 6%. Okay. So things are moving around very quickly, and you're likely already going to see those second and third instar grasshoppers hopping around. So producers should be checking the ditches, checking their fields, doing sweeps, seeing that what they're dealing with is in fact a pest grasshopper, and then making the decision on, am I at threshold? Should I be managing this already? Because there's certainly going to be some fields and some areas that are going to be at that point already. And I know I've chatted with a few producers in the South who, even a couple of weeks ago, were already starting to see feeding from grasshoppers on their crops. So on the lookout for that is going to be top of mind for those grasshopper pressured regions. And yes, cutworms. Cutworms seem to be such a big issue this year in Alberta, and we are, continuing to see that pressure into June. And we had the question pop up, how long should I be seeing this cutworm pressure in my fields? And know that some of these cutworms will cause pressure into July. Army cutworm, pale western cutworm, redback, these will actually remain as larvae and continue to hatch into larvae into July and continue to feed on that crop. So producers should be aware that we may not be out of the woods in terms of cutworm pressure yet. Continue monitoring, continue scouting, and manage where necessary. Obviously be cognizant of multiple applications of pesticides if you're getting into that scenario where you have to be applying more than once. I know we've gone into those scenarios where, not only are we losing crop because of this and having to reseed, but we're having to maybe make multiple management tactics to keep those cutworms at bay. So yes, continue to be on the lookout as we head through June. Continue to monitor and continue to work with your agronomist to make sure that you're rotating those insecticides, not using them more often than they should, and using them only when absolutely necessary when we hit those thresholds.
See, and here I always thought cutworm was like a seedling issue. And then once you get past the seedling side, free and clear. But now you're giving me bad news that I have to keep looking for cutworms.
The other part here, Lyndsey, is, my goodness, we're so dry. It's just we haven't been moved. We don't have that big, lush crop growth. So there's still going to be some impacts, and producers should still be monitoring. But you're right, they could be kind of still there in the soil, causing a little bit of impact, but not killing those plants back. So, you'll have to take a close look and see, am I still losing plants, or are they just present and causing a little bit of feeding damage?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Definitely a difficult one. And this is one of those things. I will send out the reminder, finding some of those or seeing some of those pictures on social media. Really, seeing some of the grasshopper damage has just been absolutely, this early in the season has been really fascinating, in, of course, a terrible way, but also just, as you said, so 68% hatched versus less than 10 on average is, it blows my mind a little, I won't lie. So definitely a great reminder to get out there and scout. Okay, what about, here's maybe a better news story, and then we'll come back to some of the diseases side. But for those farmers that got some rain, and maybe we're talking Saskatchewan, there's an opportunity here maybe to, hey, you've got a crop, now I got to feed it. What's that decision look like? We'll start with this good news story of feeding this crop.
Yeah, Lyndsey, I mean, as much as Alberta has been dry for the past couple of months, it looks like east of us, you guys managed to get some rain, which is wonderful to see. And hopefully that brings some relief to the crop. And it may be posing a question to some producers who are saying, I held back a little bit on my nitrogen as I went into the season. Things were feeling a little bit dry, so I didn't fertilize what I thought might be full potential given a lack of moisture. Now, if we did see enough rainfall, that question may be popping up of, can I top up my nitrogen to make better use of that rainfall that came? Again, it's important to think about, how much moisture does wheat crop usually utilize? And, the general range we talk about is about 4 to 5 inches to complete its vegetative growth. And then every inch beyond there, you're looking at around 5, 6, 7 bushels per inch of rain. So if you are receiving that rain and you're going, gosh, I didn't fertilize, I didn't put down enough nitrogen to achieve what now I'm getting rainfall for, can I apply in-crop nitrogen to attain that yield? And, typically we recommend to be putting that application down in around tillering, beginning, middle, or end of tillering can work. I like to see it a little bit earlier, because then if some of that nitrogen is available during tillering, we can increase the amount of tillers, which, depending on the situation we're in, can be a huge benefit. We want those nice, early, strong main tillers to be producing. And my recommendation for producers here is, always think about, when I'm putting down nitrogen in crop, what is the efficiency of uptake? And what we've seen from previous research from Ross McKenzie out of the southern part of Alberta is that generally when we're doing in-crop nitrogen or at that timing, it's about 40% efficiency. Mm-hmm. So if you're putting down 10 pounds, you're getting 4 of those being taken up by that crop and contributing to yield. So think about that when you're doing your math. How much extra bushels am I thinking about getting based on the rainfall and my yield expectation now? And then typically using something like UAN is recommended with streamer bars. We want to be applying this when the crop is already a little bit damp. We do not want to be applying this in the middle of the day and causing any burn. That ranges all the way from Alberta to Ontario to further east from there. So, always keeping that consideration in mind. and keeping that 40% efficiency in mind. So if you're looking at an extra 10 bushel increase, you want to be getting 20 pounds of nitrogen down. And if you're thinking about 40% efficiency, how many pounds of nitrogen do I need to apply to get to that 10 bushels or 20 pounds of nitrogen available? So keeping the product in mind when you're applying, how you're applying, and what the actual efficiency of that nitrogen is, and how much rainfall you actually receive to be achieving that potential yield. So if you're in that situation, you're one of the lucky ones. So hopefully that provides a lot of benefit if you're able to get that down.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'll just comment, because I feel like it needs to be said, 40% efficiency doesn't feel great. I'll be honest. So I'm glad you point that out.
No, it does not. No, it does not. And this is an important factor that producers need to keep in mind, is not every pound of nitrogen that they're putting down in crop is going towards yield. So weighing that out, how much am I actually spending on this nitrogen? And am I actually expected to get that yield based on the rainfall that I have now, and what I potentially expect to get over the next few weeks as well? So it's all part of the decision making there, and making sure that if you are going to go through that work and make that pass over the field, are you applying enough based on what those expectations are?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Okay, now you wanted to talk as well about bacterial leaf streak. I know I've certainly heard a bit about this over the last few seasons. What do farmers need to be on the lookout for? Is this something that is increasing? Are we just seeing it because we're scouting for it? What's the story with bacterial leaf streak?
I think we're certainly seeing a little bit of both of those things, Lyndsey. We've seen the amount of incidents and reported incidents go up over the past few years in Western Canada. More challenged maybe in those irrigation regions where we're just seeing a little bit more moisture in that canopy more often. And there's been a bit of awareness around it, so we're probably looking a little bit closer. But I've walked in too many barley fields already this spring and see it, and I've seen it pop up and seen it already in that tillering stage, which, usually I'm getting those reports later on in the season when we get closer to flag leaf, when people are looking a little bit closer at disease pressure and potential of applying a fungicide. But we're seeing these infections earlier, mostly on barley at this point, but we know we've seen it in wheat as well. So the big thing is for producers and agronomists to be on the lookout for bacterial leaf streak symptoms. So we're looking at water soaking. We're looking at kind of the bacterial ooze that comes. In fact, I love saying that, this bacterial
ooze.
It looks like little water droplets that are kind of oozing out of this water-soaked region on the leaf. Typically, it's a little bit elongated, but sometimes it's circular and sits on the edge. Sometimes it runs through the center of the leaf, so it can vary depending on where the pressure and where the infection occurred. But if it doesn't look typical for a normal foliar disease infection, it's worth kind of reaching out and determining whether, hey, could this potentially be bacterial leaf streak? The Prairie Crop Disease Monitoring Network is taking reports in of these and suggesting that producers send leaf material and plant material into their local labs to test whether this is bacterial leaf streak, because then we can start to get an idea of, okay, if we do see infection of the field, let's send that seed lot in to be tested, see what the infection level is there, and then understand maybe what kind of pressure we're seeing in the field versus what type of infection we're seeing in that seed, and then maybe making different management decisions on that seed, maybe rotating it to a drier field if that's available, or maybe holding that seed back for a different year, a different option. But there's unfortunately not a lot of options right now for producers in managing this. But being aware that it is present and being aware if it is present in your seed will help you make better decisions with that seed and understand maybe where your risks are. And the last thing I'll say about this is fungicide is not going to help.
Right.
Bacterial leaf streak is a bacterial infection. So thinking that it will be managed with a fungicide is is not going to be helpful, because then we run through the field, we add moisture, we may be causing infection to spread throughout the field by doing this. And this is actually one of the ways that we find whether a field is infected with bacterial leaf streak, because we get reports of a fungicide not working, and then we go in and find that it's in fact not a fungal disease, but bacterial leaf streak. So important for producers and agronomists to be on the lookout and identify and report, so we can continue to get more information about this disease and manage it appropriately as we learn more about it.
Right. Fungicide for fungus. Bactericide for bacteria. Different. Okay, that is a key point. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining me on the show today. That's fantastic. I really do appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you, Lyndsey.
All right, we'll be back with more Real Ag Radio right after this.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today. Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by the Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association, which invites you to attend Partnerships, the Farmer and the Cattleman, to hear from guest speakers Rick Clark and Terry Aberhart, as well as a panel of farmers who are alleviating fertilizer costs by including cattle and cover crops in their grain rotations. Join us for lunch and to explore options for improved soil health at Canada's Farm Show, June 21st and 22nd in Regina. For more information or to pre-register for your free tickets, call 306-421-8538. All right, we head now to, I think it's our latest soybean school. Definitely a hot topic. For this soybean school, we've got Johanna Lindeboom from Clark's Agri-Service and Burn Tobin talking about the replant decision on soybeans, because of course we had rain, but maybe not enough or at the right time, and we've got some stranded beans. So for that chat, we go now to this soybean school.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Welcome to the Soybean School. Today I'm down in Fisherville, Ontario, catching up with Johanna Lindeboom from Clark Agri-Service. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, and thank you for the invitation. I want to get into this field. We're in a situation where, we're trying to evaluate the spring planting emergence in this soybean field. And hey, you've got a little bit of everything going on here and maybe some challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're standing here, I actually don't think it looks too bad. I'd keep this soybean crop all day, but it's a bit of a dangerous time of the year. You can drive by the field at 80 kilometers an hour and start to see the rows. But we get over the top of this hill towards the back, and we got some issues we're dealing with. This was planted the week of May 15th. We had a half an inch to an inch and a half rain on May 20th, and anything planted in that week leading up to the rain, we're starting to see some issues with, whether it's crusting, vigor, cold injury.
So, Johanna, let's move around this field, check out what's going on, and look at some of the things that you need to consider when you make an overall replant decision on that field.
Okay, let's take a look. So first thing, on clay replants, everybody's going to think crusting. But what I think we've got going on here is actually some cold injury. When we look at these plants, they're probably a quarter, half an inch before they're out of the soil surface. They've been planted for almost 3 weeks now. And, why on earth isn't it coming out of the ground? So if we look at this little plant here, really there's not a whole lot wrong with it other than the fact that it's been 3 weeks to emerge. What I think we've got going on, 2 weeks ago we had 2 nights that had frost on them. And if you didn't have frost, you at the very least had some really low night temperatures. The week previous, we had a frost or some low night temperatures. And all the while, these plants were trying to get up out of the ground. Our daytime temperatures would get up to maybe 19, 20 at the highs, but then they drop right back down at night. And I really think these plants are just sort of losing their vigor and they're running out of steam. So when beans are in the ground for 2.5 to 3 weeks, we can see a lot of issues happening. There's a lot happening in this field. We have insect injuries starting on a couple of these. You turn them around, you can see that their tails are starting to dry up. Those beans are definitely not going to make it. And then we have this swollen hypocotyl happening. That's more of what you would see if you have a true crust, and we can see where the ground is really hard and tight as well. This bean actually managed to push through, but you get this really swollen hypocotyl here, and then when the bean tries to poke through the soil, it'll actually snap off. We've got some of that happening down in the ground here, and those beans are less likely to make it. What you want to see is a healthy soybean just beneath the surface. You don't want to see a swollen hypocotyl. You want to see it nice and green. Those are the plants that you want to be patient with, and the ones that have a chance to push through and make it. So what we have going on here is some open seed trenches. If you looked at this field, you'd instantly say, oh, farmer planted when it was too wet. But we can get some of these issues when the field is too dry as well, especially on the heavy clays. When it gets really hard, you can slice through when it's dry, very similar to when it's wet. Farmer probably had down pressure increased, and that can smear the sidewall a little bit. And while the beans are still making it out of the ground, if we're going to replant, if you have this type of scenario going on, even when you do get a rain, the seam is going to split and you're going to wick out any moisture that you did have in that seed trench. So this is something really to consider if you're going back in and replanting the fields. You want to be behind your air seeder, behind your planter, making sure that you can properly close those trenches so that we can have a successful replant.
So Johanna, we've been around this field. You've got some issues, and this is probably a replant situation. But hey, first of all, could we wait it out?
In this case, I would say no. Most of the plants we were digging up were non-viable. The ones with the dried out roots, the ones that are breaking off at the surface, the ones that have been eaten by insects. But in other situations, waiting it might be the way to go. If you can keep this field, it's their first planted, it's going to be their highest yield. That's what you want to do, and sometimes patience is all you need.
Patience is all you need, and if not, we've got to look at our options. So, if we're going to go for a replant, what are our options?
So first option is replant right now. But in order to do that, you have to be able to get to moisture, is the first thing. In some cases, depending where you are, moisture might be more than 2.5 inches deep. I really don't like planting soybeans deeper than that. Maybe if you're on a sandy loam, but even then, you're pushing it. If you can't get to moisture, then maybe you want to look at planting into dry soil, 1.5 inches deep, and you can wait for a rain. Our third option is wait for a rain. It'll sort of soften up the ground again. You'll have moisture to plant into, and then go. That is a tricky one depending on how many acres you have to plant. Yeah. So be a little bit careful with that, and you never know quite how much rain we're going to get either. But if you only had 1 or 2 fields to do, you can kind of pick your window and then go at it.
Johanna, great stuff. Thank you for taking the time to spend with me on the Soybean School. We'll catch up with you later in the summer.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you to Johanna and to Bern for that report. I'm going to come back with Peter Wheat Pete Johnson for 2 segments to wrap up what's happening in agronomy in Ontario this week.
Co-op AgZone Field is a digital agronomy tool designed to help optimize your operation. Through integrated layers of satellite imagery, soil maps, yield data, and more, Co-op Grow Team members use AgZone Field to provide organized, timely, in-season data, allowing you to make informed management decisions quickly and effectively. Trust your co-op grow team to support your operation with AgZone Field. Contact your local co-op today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am your host on this Agronomic Monday, Lyndsey Smith. And joining me now is the beast from the East, Peter Repeat Johnson. How are you, Pete?
I'm awesome, but I tell you, I've never been called the beast from the East before.
So earlier in the show, I had Jeremy Boychyn. I called him the best from the West. So I'm going with a rhyming theme, so we'll go from there. So there you go. That's your new name.
I sort of like best more than beast, but okay.
You have to take it. I'm the host. I can do what I want. Okay. So, and also I'm in great spirits because here in Ontario, we have some much needed rain hitting much of the province. I'm over in the far east. You're, I guess, considered central. I don't know. You can correct me there. Maybe you're western, but this was very needed. What do things look like where you are, Pete?
So you're exactly right. We went, 27 days without rain or something like that. And boy, it was getting dry, just fiercely dry. 23 days, just did the calculation without rain. And my wheat crop, oh my gosh, it was burning up. I actually tweeted a picture out on the weekend of a barley field where the erosion has happened, and it's tillage erosion. You can clearly see it's tillage erosion, but where that tillage erosion has pulled the topsoil off, there's nothing left. Like, there's no saving the crop. It was dead. The rest of the field's fine, but needed rain desperately. So yes, between 10 millimeters, so that's about 0.4 of an inch, and the least apparently along Lake Huron up in Huron County. That's sort of and to the north. But all the way up to some people reporting 40 millimeters. So that's in the 1.6 inch range, somewhere in that range. So nice, gorgeous, beautiful rain, gentle, all night. And I'd say, like, you couldn't order it any better. But, man, we had a gentle rain. What we really thought was a gorgeous, gentle rain back on the 19th of May. And it caused all sorts of problems with emergence on the soybean crop. So even though this seems like a gorgeous rain for the edible beans that are in the ground and struggling to come up, hopefully it works better than that 0.4 did on the 19th of May. The soil's warmer. I really think it's just what the doctor ordered, but I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah, we'll see. So let's back up one moment, but two things. And exactly that, sometimes, so rain is supposed to be our friend, but sometimes it's not. And that was the case. But backing up just quickly with the tillage erosion, pulling that topsoil off, let's say the knolls or those sorts of things, and they are burning up. Let's just quickly hit on why. And it's that you're missing organic matter, right? You're missing water holding capacity on those knolls. Why do knolls burn up when there's no rain?
So you're missing organic matter, but you're also actually missing the topsoil as well. And the topsoil is where we hold the most water. If you look at soil moisture profiles, we typically talk about that first foot holding 2 inches of water. You get down below, it's just more compact. There's less organic matter. And so you hold less water. And you also are shallower depths. You get shallower rooting depths because you don't have structure in that soil. And what's really interesting, Lyndsey, and if you look at my tweet picture, it's often not the very top of the knoll that is the worst. It's the shoulder of the knoll. And why is that? Because on the top, it's sort of half level. And just as you come on the shoulder, that's where you go more into more of a slope, a steeper slope. Plus, when you're going downhill, now the tractor is over the hill and going down the hill, and so you're speeding up. And speed is really one of the driving factors of tillage erosion. And you say, well, okay, so I'm going downhill. The cultivator throws that soil up in the air. Gravity pulls it down the hill. That's tillage erosion. But when I go uphill, well, gosh, aren't I throwing it back up the hill? Well, the answer is yes. Two things happen. Going up the hill, that tractor slows down. And sometimes you, on some of these CVTs, they actually slow down like 2 gears in the process. And it's like, wow, so we were going a lot slower, and the slower we go, it's like kind of, you throw that baseball. If you only throw it half-hearted, it doesn't go very far. If you throw it hard, it goes a long way. Plus, you're throwing uphill versus downhill, and we just don't drag it back up the slope. But it really is the shoulder slopes that show it first, and it's kind of interesting because in my picture, the very top of the slope is okay. The shoulder slope is beat up, and then as you move down that slope, it's okay again. And it's the best in the hollows. That's just the way it is. We've dragged all that topsoil down there. But yeah, it's shallow rooting depth. It's less water holding capacity. It's oftentimes there's lots of nutrients there. We keep lots of nutrients there, but it just doesn't have rooting depth. It doesn't have soil structure to allow better rooting depth, and we hold less moisture.
There you go. Okay, there we have it. Okay, let's move to, as you mentioned, this rainfall, it would have been great to have had one 2 weeks ago, but I also, with apologies to out west when we start to complain after 3 weeks of no rain, when some places have had, no word of a lie, none this season yet. So we will wear our humble hat for just a moment. But for your wheat crop, and of course it is yours, Pete, the entire province, it is Pete's wheat crop. Where are we at with grain fill? How important is the timing of this rain?
So this rainfall is just unbelievably critical. And by the way, Lyndsey, the people in Western Canada, like without rain, that's brutal, but it's a little bit more like our corn and soybean crop. And so we don't have rain on the corn and soybean crop for that time frame, and it's getting dry. But I was digging in cornfields on Saturday. We were doing a planter assessment, and man, there was great moisture when you got 3 inches down. And you say, well, how can that be with no rain for 23 days and, less than an inch of rain the whole month of May? And we're now the 10th of June. So we're 40 days with less than an inch of rain. How can you have good moisture? Well, the crop hadn't used any. So it simply doesn't matter. Or I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but the crop can tolerate that dry. And we actually in Ontario say that dry May, a drought in May is the best thing that can happen for the corn and soybean crop, because it forces them to grow roots down so that when they get into the grain fill period, they've got a big root system there to draw water from. Totally the opposite with my winter wheat crop, and it's my winter barley crop too. I'll take them all because they've pollinated on, let's say, June the 1st. And the critical period for them is sort of that 14 or 20 days prior to anthesis, followed by, or prior to heading, followed by the next 14 days after anthesis. Generally, 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after, pollination is the most critical for big yields. Well, if I'm struggling from lack of moisture 2 weeks before anthesis, right through anthesis on June the 1st, or with, Pete's wheat crop, it was June the 5th, and then I still get another week with no rain, that does not make for huge wheat yields. It just doesn't. I don't know. It's a difference in terms of the timing of water demand with the crop, and that's why it is so important for the wheat crop. It's kind of interesting. The hay crop, in much of the province, hay yields were above average. Some growers 30% above average. Not everywhere. There's some areas that weren't. But man, that regrowth on the alfalfa, it was pretty much stalled because, again, the alfalfa crop had pulled all that moisture out of the soil, and now you need more moisture to get that next growth going.
Right. So we may see it so much more on second cut for sure. Although if you're like me, you haven't finished first cut. But anyway, moving on. We won't focus on that right now. You know what? Let's talk about the hay that's been heating in the next segment because we don't have enough time in this segment. But I did just quickly want to touch on, of course, a couple weeks ago, we did tackle the T3 fungicide timing question. We've got a wheat school. And also, I don't know if you know this, Pete, but you've been recording some of these YouTube shorts with Bern Tobin, and they've been doing phenomenal on YouTube. So shout out for the two of you for doing something new and innovative and having a great time. Check it out. It's on our YouTube channel. But does this rain at this time make you regret not going at T3 if you didn't, or are you still in the clear?
So from a fusarium standpoint, I think you're still mainly in the clear. And it depends on where in the province. If your wheat was just starting to pollinate, and there is some as we move up into Grey and Bruce and certainly into your part of the world, Lyndsey, that's just pollinating, that's at higher risk. If you're in Essex County where it pollinated on June the 1st or May the 29th and you're 14 days past pollination, the risk of fusarium really quite low. The risk of other diseases and the risk of things like alternaria, the disease that turns the crop black, makes the combine black, makes the straw dusty, that's still very real. So you may regret not spraying that fungicide from other perspectives, but dawn in the grain and fusarium infection, for the most part, the risk remains quite low.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. We're going to take a break. But Pete, you're going to stick around for the last segment of today's show. So we'll get back with more with Wheat Pete right after this.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio on this Agronomic Monday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by U.S. Borax. Granubor, ask for it by name. I had no idea there were differences in boron sources, but I have learned that there are. All right, joining me for this final segment, Peter Wheat Pete Johnson, Real Agriculture resident agronomist, as we like to call you. Pete, we did mention in the last segment the question about hay, first cut hay, yields were good, but we also had that very hot, very dry window in May that plenty of producers took hay, and some made dry hay, but that is leading to a slight issue, and by slight I mean large, in that we have had instances of hay fires and of course heating as well. So what do we know so far? What happened?
So I don't know if we do know what happened, Lyndsey. Some of the things that we are aware of is that people cut hay early, and that's a good thing from a quality perspective. And they cut hay early because the weather was so gorgeous. How could you not utilize that kind of a stretch of weather? Even people with woolly pigs were cutting hay that early.
We were busy lambing, okay? We've been over this. But anyway, carrying on. Yes. So a couple things that happens when you cut it early. It's immature hay is higher in moisture. There's no question about that. And it tends not to give that moisture up quite as easily. It's a bit like harvesting 38% moisture
corn versus 24% moisture corn, it takes a lot more time for the 38% moisture corn to get the moisture in the center of the kernel to migrate to the outside edges of the kernel and dissipate through the corn dryer. And that's why 38% moisture corn, when you put it through the corn dryer, you often caramelize it because the kernel gets so hot before that moisture can migrate out to the edge of the kernel and disappear. So it just gets so hot before it's at the right moisture that the starch caramelizes. We wonder if this immature hay being so high in moisture, even though the moisture testers said it was dry, they were measuring the moisture on the outside part of the stem and not picking up the fact that there was still moisture in the inside part of the stem, and that threw the whole thing out of whack. And so we end up with hay that we thought was 12% moisture that is now 145 degrees Fahrenheit in the barn, and we got to do something about it. Mm-hmm. We're not positive that's the scenario, but the other thing that I wonder about, Lyndsey, and you and I chatted a little bit about this, but if I harvest my wheat crop when it's 35 degrees Celsius, it can be at 12% moisture, and I put it in the bin, and how could 12% or 10% moisture wheat go off quality? Well, man, if I don't cool that wheat from 35 degrees back to 20 or 25 degrees Celsius, you get moisture migration because it's so hot going into the bin. And that time frame, when a lot of that dry hay was made, it was very hot conditions, went into the barn hot, and there's no aeration to cool that hay down. And so maybe just the temperature itself causes some of that moisture migration, the convective currents that happen inside a storage unit, and that's where it's coming from. Either way, the bottom line is we're not sure why, but dang it all, get the temperature probe into that hay. And I know some producers, they put hay in and they thought it's maybe not quite as dry as we'd like, and there's not many small square bale people anymore, but some people, they throw salt on it every layer when they're putting it in. That just really doesn't work very much. It might make you feel good, but if you were salting hay going into the mouth, please get a temperature probe in there.
Yeah, go check it. Well, now, and realistically, I have seen certainly some people that they knew moisture was maybe a bit iffy on their small squares, so they set up sort of an aeration type system like you're talking about trying to move some of that last moisture. But that's when it went in questionable scenarios, right? So I think the key here is that for many people, they really thought they had dry hay. So that's why we're trying to remind everybody, right, that it isn't dry, maybe.
Yeah, it's just like everything else. You got to monitor whether it's your crop in the field and you got to go scout it, whether it's the grain in the bin and you got to read the temperature probes, or you have to turn the aeration fan on and smell the air coming out of it. Like there's many different facets, but at the end of the day, if you put it in and walk away, you could be sorry that you didn't go back and monitor.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about rotation. We'll call this observations from the field. You've been out scouting. There's been some great discussions about rotation impacts. What are you seeing?
So, and there really has been a great Twitter thread, and I don't know if you follow me on Twitter and people talk about corn on corn. My answer to corn on corn is bah, just bah, or soybeans on soybeans. It's the same answer, bah. It's just bad. Don't do it. But there are growers that make it work, and that's cool. Like Warren Schneckenberger from Eastern Ontario, your part of the world, Lyndsey, he tweets some pictures of corn on corn in a strip till system, and you look at it and you go, gosh, that looks good. So I mentioned that I was out, doing a planter performance comparison on Saturday, and we went to one field. It was corn after winter wheat, and it was at least, and then the next field is corn after soybeans. And the corn after winter wheat was the same stage, planted roughly the same day, physiologically, we counted leaf tips. It was the same stage as the corn following soybeans. And you'd walk into the corn following soybean field and you'd say, oh, this corn is just like, it's short and it's not looking thrifty. And you walk into the corn following wheat and it's dark green and looks gorgeous. And I have a client with corn following wheat and an oat cover crop. And in my Saturday example, it was wheat with red clover, but the corn with wheat beside corn after edible beans. And you can see right to the line. They're planted the same day, same hybrid, right to the line. And what's really interesting is that in the corn following edible beans, on the eroded knolls, he got in there too early. And it was just like the slot smeared, and he's got some purple corn. It looked totally droughted because the sidewall was smeared, and it's rootless corn at this point. Until today's rain, it's rootless corn, and you just cross the line, and so much better soil structure in that wheat field that even though he was probably there just a little too early, the corn on wheat stubble 100%. So there's so much to unwrap from that perspective, but it is just really interesting, in my opinion, how that shakes out.
I don't know if there's that much to unwrap. Let's just say what we need to say, and that's that beans are kind of lame. Let's be honest, everybody. We need more wheat in rotation. No, I mean, but what is going on? Is it all about, the soil dynamic of roots from the bean crop? Is it, the soil fungi and the flora and fauna interactions? Is it that it's drawing different nutrients that corn needs early on? Like, what are some of the things that we know are happening in that scenario?
So, Lyndsey, it's really interesting you go there because Dr. Terry Daynard, one of my mentors, just such a smart guy. I wish I was half as smart as him. And he joins the Twitter conversation when I made a tongue-in-cheek comment that corn after wheat is always the best, or that corn likes following wheat the best, something like that. And he just comes back and says, and why is that? And it's like, dang it, we really don't know. We don't. I wonder, because it's interesting. Eric Richter from Syngenta sent me some pictures from the island, Prince Edward Island, of spring barley, and you can actually see the roots of the spring barley growing above the surface of the soil. They've had up to 4 inches of rain over the last 10 days. It's perfect growing conditions. Cereals have lots of surface feeder roots. And when you get those surface feeder roots, they make great structure in the soil surface in that top 4 inches, maybe 6 inches, whereas soybeans and corn don't do that. So is that what's going on? Is it just the fact that you break the disease cycle? Is there something else? Is it mycorrhizal? I don't think we know, but it sure seems to work.
And maybe it's a combination of those things, because isn't it always? Can we really ever say it's only one of them?
Yeah, no, probably not. It's probably a combination, but it's interesting that Terry would ask me, and I'd have to say, that's a good question. I don't really know.
It's constant curiosity, right? We have to keep asking why. So either way, the take-home message is keep that wheat in rotation as much as you can, because your corn crop will thank you. So there you go.
100%. So will your soybean crop, by the way. Both crops will thank you for including wheat.
You have to mention beans. Okay. All right, Pete, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Hey, are you going to catch the Agronomist tonight? We're going to talk about cereal leaf diseases, 8 p.m. Eastern. Are you going to join us? Or are you going to be in the field?
You're talking about cereals. How could I not join?
All right. Well, I shall look for you in the comments, and anybody else, if you want to join us, I'll be hosting tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere Real Agriculture is, it goes live. All right. And thank you to Pete. Thanks to Jeremy Boychyn, of course, to Johanna Lindeboom, and Jason Stovey, my producer, for putting the show together today. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.